In 1739, the famous Scottish philosopher David Hume, who was fairly young at the time, made the observation that there is an almost insurmountable breach between facts and values. And this came to be known as the is-ought problem. Namely, that it does not logically follow that an observation about some natural thing in the world can be used as the basis for making a judgment about how things should be. In other words, facts cannot dictate morals. There has to be some higher power, some higher reasoning behind morality. And this view has dominated the sciences for the centuries since, such that for most of my life, as far as I have been cognizant of such things, probably from teenage onward, what has largely characterized the sciences in academia and just in the popular imagination is a moral relativism, which is to say that morality is a matter of preference and that things can't really be claimed about what ought to be because there's no factual basis, there is no rational observable basis for dictating those things. Of course, this position has never been coherent with Christianity, nor with many other world religions that believe we are accountable to a God or some higher power than us who dictates the conditions that we are to follow as we exist in this creation. But in 2009, the neuroscientist and acclaimed writer and philosopher Sam Harris undertook to come up with his own solution to the is-ought problem. So he wrote a book titled The Moral Landscape. I read this book a few weeks ago, and I've sort of been thinking about it since and working on some other things. But I thought it was important to discuss this book, approximately 17 years late. I was 15 or 16 when it came out. I certainly wasn't equipped to handle the arguments therein. And I think that's why it's important to talk about, because Harris is very creative in how he undertakes his arguments. He has points of agreement with people of faith. He does not believe in a moral relativistic system. He thinks that, in fact, things can be known about morality and that there is objective truth and objective morality. However, what he believes to be the source of this is very different from what we understand as Christians. And so I think that people who are exposed to these arguments for the first time may find them rather compelling, especially if they haven't been taught or trained to think in these terms. So that's why I wanted to have this episode this week. And, the book is titled The Moral Landscape, but to me, after concluding my analysis, I am forced to conclude that his ideas lead more to an immoral landscape, which is the title of today's episode of Luke Up. Okay, welcome back, saints and sinners, and thank you for joining us this week. I am thrilled to be continuing 2026 strong with a heavy hitter this week. So we're going to get into a lot of the topics that are covered in this book. I wouldn't say that I recommend reading it per se. Maybe after you have heard some of the arguments fleshed out and just kind of could go into it prepared. I will tell you, I was sort of blindsided by some of the arguments in this book. And it took a lot of thinking and a lot of research and a lot of prayer. And honestly, a lot of just reading the book more closely, because we'll get into this in a minute. We still need to read our Bible verse of the day. But Harris is very clever. You know, as I said in the intro, as far as I can recollect, most atheists have been moral relativists. And that has always been fairly easy to defeat because, well, as I've said many times in this show, we all have a sense of right and wrong. Now, some people's sense is calibrated a little differently. But I don't think that is a matter of preference. I think that is a matter of moral failing to meet the standard that has been set for us. Okay. Well, let's read the Bible verse of the day. And I realized that 2 Corinthians 10:5 last week, as I said, it was kind of a two-part verse. The first part was about destroying lofty speculations that are raised up against God, and the second part was about taking every thought captive. And so I thought, well, it really could have worked for this week too, but not to worry. We have a new set of Bible verses that are just as applicable. And we're going to turn to the wise words of King Solomon in Proverbs. So this is Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Okay. That's a good sort of grounding verse for what we're going to get into, because so in our Sunday school class this week, our primary Sunday school teacher said something interesting that it's a little jarring, but I think it's true, and I think everyone needs to recognize it. And this applies to every Christian denomination. But it was something that someone, either a pastor or someone in a higher position than he, had said at a previous church he went to, that said a lot of Christians are living under the incorrect assumption that he's a Lutheran, that there's just a lot of Lutherans out there that are looking for the right church. And so we need to help them find their home here at our church. And, when in reality, there are a lot of lost people out there who aren't looking for a church at all. And, as a church, you kind of have to decide, what are you willing to compromise to bring people in? Because is it about bringing people in, or is it about ensuring the continuity of sound doctrine? And anyway, I just thought that was really stark and true, because it paints the clear picture that the church is not the world. Sometimes we flirt with it, and we take on things that we shouldn't and make ourselves look more like the world. But the church that Christ built is not the world. And the things of God are foolish to man. So I read this book, expecting to just be able to blow the arguments out of the water. And if you're not careful, some of these could seem actually logically compelling. And so I think a book like this is very dangerous, because for people who are not thinkers and can't get past something that on the surface seems to make sense, they could easily be led astray. And, one of my main goals in this show is to sort of help people bolster their faith. But also, even for agnostic people that might see one of my shorts pop up on YouTube, I'm hopeful that, some of these words will ring true. So, for probably a better defense, and here I am, telling you something else to go watch while I'm doing a podcast. But I found to be very informative and helpful this debate between Sam Harris and the famous Christian philosopher and theologian William Lane Craig that was held at Notre Dame, I think around 2010 or 11, shortly after the book came out, The Moral Landscape. And Dr. Craig is one of the best expositors of the Christian faith under fire. So I highly recommend it. He stays on track. He doesn't get sucked into the tricks, the logical tricks that Sam Harris tries to play. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. And I apologize, I'm having some technical difficulties, so there will be some splices in this video. For whatever reason, my recording software just keeps spazzing out. So bear with me. This one may be a little choppy, but we're doing the best we can here. And I think this is a really important one to get out. So who knows? Maybe the adversary is working against us here. So what I've done is I've taken some of the key arguments from Harris's book. Now, I'm sure he would, if he cared what a lowly Christian podcaster such as myself had to say about his book, and maybe he does, but I'm sure he would levy the same accusation against me that he did against Dr. Craig, that I'm taking this out of context, that I am deliberately misunderstanding, or something like that. So we're just going to go through some of the key points that he makes, not in any particular order, just things that stood out to me. And we'll critique them, and I will do my best to address them, because there are answers to all of these things. And it's not just turn your brain off and start reading the Bible. God gives us natural revelation and divine revelation. He doesn't expect us to turn our brains off. It's just that faith is a little more complicated than that. It's an active process. It's not just a intellectual assent to an idea. Okay, so one of his arguments, which supports his central thesis of the book, which is that science can be used to describe morality, can and should. So because of course he's an atheist, and so being someone who believes in objective morality, he knows that he needs to find a solution. And as a neuroscientist, well, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when you're a neuroscientist, everything looks like brain science to you. Oh, there's something in the brain that we can point to that explains that. I am not a neuroscientist, admittedly. So, you might say that I am unqualified to talk on the subject. My background is in more nitty gritty. I was a geology major in college. They called that the blue collar of the physical sciences. So I'm not a biologist, but I can tell you what a woman is, unlike one of the current sitting Supreme Court justices. So I did at least learn that. Not from school necessarily, just sort of common sense, observation, also in Scripture. But I digress. One of his main points, he has this analogy that morality is like health. So, we may disagree on some finer points about what constitutes good health, but that everyone is in agreement that health is a positive thing to be pursued, and that if you have a condition where you are vomiting all the time, that is bad, and that's an ingrained aversion we have to that kind of state. We want to be healthy and not vomiting all the time. Now, he concedes that, well, science may not be able to tell you to be in good health how many miles one should be able to run. So he admits of limitations, but he says it's like that everyone knows what health is, and there's a general consensus that being healthy is good, even though we define it differently and we disagree on fine points of it. And he says morality is like that. That there are varying terrains on the moral landscape. So there may be smaller peaks where people have attained a certain level of morality, but then over here there's a higher peak where you can get closer to the highest morality, but to get there you have to make changes, and that takes you down off the peak, and then you come back up and improve. It's an interesting idea, but there are problems with that, as we'll discuss later. So, problems with the moral landscape itself notwithstanding, the problem that I have with the allusion to health is, and this sounds pedantic, but it really matters, and that is, on what basis would you say that health is good? Now, Harris appeals to a commonality, a common sense that people have that health is good. But he never really explains why. He just uses that as an assumed thing. Oh, how everybody assumes that health is good? Well, everybody also assumes that morality is good. But the problem is, why does everyone assume that health is good? Certainly some people don't. Those people are arguably defective in some capacity, but you're not obligated to view health as a good thing. So where does that sense come from? Where does that upward striving toward a goal come from? We really don't see this in any other animals in creation. Now, of course, Sam Harris would say, well, this is because they are less evolved. And this raises its own whole host of problems because, how do you make judgments about what is okay for animals? Is it okay for animals to be enslaved as pets? Now, he would probably say that, well, because they are not sentient, they're not self-aware, we'll say, that they do not attain all the same rights and privileges of sentient beings. This would also be how he would defend something like abortion. Now, he doesn't spend much time on that in the book, but this is an epistemological problem that he never really solves. It just seems to be sort of taken for granted that health is a good thing, Morality is like health. Everybody wants to be healthy, so everybody wants morality. And yeah, we don't always agree, but there's an ingrained neuroscientific reason for it. Okay, well, it just seems to me that you are making an axiomatic assumption, which, if you are trying to get at ultimate causes, you can't do. For me as a Christian, I believe that morality originates from what William Lane Craig would call a competent authority. He has this great analogy that if a police officer pulls you over when you're driving down the road, you are obligated to pull over because they have been vested with the authority to do that. But if some random person in a normal car tries to pull you over, you're not obligated to pull over. They have not been vested with that authority. So God has the authority to make moral assignments. If you created the entire universe, then you could make the rules about how things ought to be. And so that is what we appeal to, that as beings created in God's image, we are built with a recognition on some level of what that ideal is. Now, it's corrupted because of our fallen nature and the sin nature that we have inherited from Adam. But we are built that way. So I just think that there's too many assumptions in that premise. And he's trying to mask, it's a sleight of hand kind of thing. He's trying to mask the assumptions that he's making. And in his debate with William Lane Craig, Harris basically says that you always, whatever your position is, you are making axiomatic assumptions. And so I think the implication is that Christians, well, you're axiomatically assuming that God is good. I think that's a topic for a whole other discussion. Is God good? It's sort of related to the next thing I wanted to talk about. So he makes the case. He has an entire chapter dedicated to religion. Now, that's broadly not the subject of the book. The book is about morality. But religion seems to be Sam Harris's favorite whipping boy. It does not seem to stem from pure academic observation that religion is not a worthwhile endeavor. He really seems to have this deep, abiding animus toward any type of religious faith. But he directs his ire in particular at Christianity, and especially Catholicism and Islam. So he makes the contention that basically religion is a mental defect. And as evidence, he cites that fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, shows, I guess, the part of the brain that is stimulated when someone has confidence or certainty in their beliefs. It shows that whether one believes or does not believe in God, when they are asked questions regarding the existence of some type of God, that that brain center is less active. So suggesting that there is less certainty in belief or disbelief than there is in, say, that 2 + 2 = 4. I think that Sam Harris has a fundamental misunderstanding of what faith is. So he often derisively refers to the practices of Christianity, such as the sacraments, reading scripture, prayer. He refers to these as, vain endeavors at best and barbaric and delusional. Actually, I think the word he used in the debate was psychopathic. And when Dr. Craig called him out on it and said that comment was as stupid as it is insulting, he of course tried to play it off as though he was not intending to be insulting, that he wasn't making personal statements about people, and it's ridiculous to read that into it. But it obviously was. It was a statement meant as a barb. So he's not a purely objective, rational, science-minded person who is just evaluating the evidence. My dad always taught me growing up that atheists, by and large, have axiomatically excluded the possibility of a creator when they set out to answer big picture questions. So it's no surprise that Sam Harris has a problem with religion, and he essentially calls it a mental defect. And he has this great faith in science as this all-powerful tool that will divine all the answers, not only to morality, but also to why these faulty people have these peculiar religious beliefs with no basis in science and all that. And again, he couches it in terms to portray himself as an objective observer and student on the topic. But he's clearly anything but. I want to read a quote from the book that when I read this, and I'll admit I was having a tough time when I was reading the book because I didn't have answers to all of the problems that he posed or all of the ideas that he posited. I didn't have ready answers right away. And it kind of irked me because I'm not used to that. And in fact, it was interesting because when I was talking to my wife about reading this book, and she heard some of the arguments that I found challenging, and she just said, "That's so stupid." Meanwhile, my debate with the Muslims, which again, you should check out if you haven't already on YouTube and Spotify. But she found some of the questions posited in, I think, especially in the Q&A portion, which is part 2, very challenging. Not that it caused her a crisis of faith, but just, I don't have a great answer to that. And for me, it was like, I did. None of that was problematic for me at all. Which is to say that as believers, we all have our own temptations, and we also have our own inadequacies. And Satan will use those, to try to worm his way into your mind and to destroy your faith. And we mustn't let that happen, because it is, in fact, our faith that saves us. Ephesians 2:8, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, so that no one may boast. It is a work of God." So I'm sure that Sam Harris would have many problems with that. He referred to he referred to the God of Abraham as an Iron Age God of war. So I think he has a very caricatured view of Christianity, in particular the Old Testament, and it is not really familiar with the many arguments for the harmony of the Old Testament and New Testament. I digress. I want to read a quote from Sam Harris's book. He says this: "The goal is not to get more Americans to merely accept the truth of evolution or any other scientific theory. The goal is to get them to value the principles of reasoning and educated discourse that now make a belief in evolution obligatory." The principles of reasoning and educated discourse that now make a belief in evolution obligatory. So the choice of the word obligatory is very interesting to me there. Because again, throughout the book, Sam Harris makes the case that atheism is just the rational worldview that one arises at naturally through observation. And through his debate with Dr. Craig, he made all sorts of remarks, challenging God to prove himself and positioning himself as just an honest seeker. And, well, why doesn't God just reveal himself? And why don't you write down a string of 20 numbers and, have your God reveal them to me, or, stuff like that, the Bible clearly says not to put the Lord your God to the test. And so this is a common tactic of atheists, is, mocking God. Where is your God? He points out the preponderance of miracles in Scripture, and he says, well, I guess God just got tired and didn't want to do that anymore. And so now he's just sort of left us to our own devices, which again betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of how Christians view the church and what we think the role of the Holy Spirit, who, is the aspect of God that is working right now. Christ is back up at the right hand of the Father. He's not doing stuff on earth. His work is completed. The Holy Spirit is working on believers, and that doesn't always look like people expect it to. But the point I wanted to hone in on with this quote, the principles of reasoning and educated discourse that now make a belief in evolution obligatory. When I read that, that was sort of the turning point in my reading of this book, because I realized this is not an in good faith argument. This is an all-out war. This is assault upon faith in general, but Christianity more precisely. We should not be surprised by this. Satan is threatened by the truth of the gospel, because, as Christ himself said, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free indeed. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And whom the Son has set free is free indeed. The truth about our orientation toward God and his simultaneous love for us does set us free. It sets us free from the bondage to sin and death. Sam Harris is under a death sentence right now. But as believers, we are not. We have been set free from that. We have been liberated to live lives that are regenerate, in which we undergo sanctification and we become more and more Christ-like with each day. The first thing that happens is the justification, though. And that's not something that we can attain on our own. This will tie into my final point in the conclusion. But I wanted to make it clear that atheism is a religion. And much like Islam, it is a religion of conquest. It cannot abide anything that disagrees with it. Atheists are not comfortable allowing Christians to believe what they believe. And they will claim that it is because of the atrocities perpetrated by Christians. But what it's really about is the truth is threatening. Now they would say that they are arbiters of truth and that we are the ones who are standing in the way of science and progress and, all of that. But there's an agenda here. It's not simply about seeking truth. And once I realized that, it made me take a step back, and all of these arguments just fell apart because I knew that their basis was not in fact. They were just clever tricks to try to advance an agenda. Okay, here's another problem that is basically his central thesis. And he says, and I quote, "Morality should be considered an undeveloped branch of science." The problem is that science is entirely the wrong tool for morality. Try as he might, he cannot escape the chasm between is and ought. But he has this dogged faith that science will just, if you just give it enough time, it'll catch up. And we can prove all of these stirrings that people have, that killing is wrong, that stealing is wrong. We'll be able to find that in the brain, and we'll be able to cultivate that, and we can even zap it out of other people's brains, when they're babies, and we can just make everybody have a good morality. Utopianism of this variety, always and forever, without fail, leads to dystopia. People that think that they can remake the world because they have the knowledge, they have the competence, and they have the will. Technocracy. But it never works. We need look no further than the failed state of the Soviet Union and the horrors committed by that atrocious, godless state. And one wonders what Sam Harris would have said when the godless communists were running rampant over Eastern Europe and advancing their civilization in the name of progress. But it told them to ethnically cleanse their country, to destroy those who had made accomplishments in industry and actually bettered the lives of others. Why did a godless morality not lead those people to the right conclusions? I wonder. So morality is not a scientific field. It is a field of philosophy. Science deals with the physical world. You make observations, you make predictions, and you recalibrate. It describes physical phenomena. But morality describes higher things. And when Sam Harris points his finger at God and says, well, you can't exist because if you did, you would do this thing. he said in the debate that God, the classic example of children dying in awful conditions, and he says God either, if God exists, then he is either impotent to save them or he is evil and doesn't care. But the Christian worldview has already solved this problem, the problem of evil, as I've discussed in an early episode and many times over in this podcast. God did not want the world to be this way. We broke it. And those children, yes, are, if they are beneath a certain age, they are incapable of recognizing they may be incapable of sinning if they are so small, but they have been born into a fallen world. They were born into a broken system, and they were born with a broken nature themselves, which, if they have been old enough to act upon that nature, they will be held accountable for. But God already gave us the solution. And so I don't want to get too far into that, because I think most of my listeners are fairly familiar with the basic premises of Christianity at this point. We also have some additional things to cover here. So he also says that faith is right by accident, if ever, and that it's often catastrophically wrong. My question would be, faith in what? Because he has faith in science, that it will solve all of his problems. But science does not tell his neighbor to give him a ride when his car breaks down, or to take something off of his plate at work when he's really stressed. Science doesn't, there's no, it's the is-ought problem. It is inescapable. You cannot, even if you can find the place in the brain that shows where the action that is good comes from, it cannot reach beyond into the ether and observe the why. Science is really great at the what. It is wholly inadequate for the why. What this leads to is another problem, another thing that Sam Harris raises, and he makes the claim in this book that essentially there's no such thing as free will. That people believe what they do, and they do what they do because of the combination of their environment and their brain chemistry and just neurons firing. And so, even as I'm speaking right now, I'm doing this podcast because, with my unique set of circumstances and genetics, I would necessarily react to my circumstances in such a way that put me in front of this microphone. Which is really interesting, because one could observe that Sam Harris has that in common with, say, the Calvinists. Everything is foreordained. It's just he thinks that it's foreordained by nature and biology, not by God. And, it's for this reason that I really pity him and people like him. to drift through life thinking that there's no ultimate significance to anything that you do. And yet, even though he thinks that there is ultimately no significance to anything, he has chosen to make it his life's mission to rob people of their hope. Now, he thinks it's a false hope. But as Dr. Craig points out, Christianity or belief in God is not a form of fire insurance. The reason to be a Christian is not because you're afraid, but it's because you think it's true. You find the arguments compelling, which I do. So, but he thinks that free will is an illusion. And I just don't buy it. You know, the nihilistic place that takes you sort of defeats his whole argument. Because if nothing matters, if we are foreordained by our biology and our circumstances to do what we will, then what in our biology would drive us to seek higher things, to seek abstract things? Because you may recognize that well-being is a moral good. And so naturally you want lots of people, as many people as possible, to have that. But I just don't see the evolutionary reason for survival of the fittest, to want there to be other people who are flourishing. The care for the species, even if that were a biological thing, you would want yourself to be at the top to ensure that you were protected. So why would anyone humble himself? And yet that's exactly what our God himself did. So, sort of to wrap up here, because I know we're kind of running up on time, although my timer's a little funky because this is really part 2 of the video. So I think I'm around 49, 50 minutes. I'm not totally sure. I have one final thing from the book that I want to address, and then we'll close with some remarks on just broadly the Christian view of morality. So he says, the only thing wrong with injustice is that it is on some level actually or potentially bad for people. Well, of course, as a Christian, I think he's wrong about that. Because injustice is imbalance. So, looking through the Christian lens, we don't think that what is moral is based solely on measurable outward things. For instance, there are many things that are subversively harmful. Now, I wonder if Sam Harris is supportive of things like pornography. One might say, where's the harm from so long as pornography is produced by consenting adults and it is viewed by people of an agreed upon age, where's the harm? No one dies from it. But the harm is not visible. And I can say this as someone who has been down that road, not to reveal too much about my personal life, but we have this concept in the Christian faith of sin, not just physical harm to others, but that, sin is an act that is contrary to God's will. And God's will is expressed through his created order. So, for instance, homosexuality. People like Sam Harris would say, what's the problem? Where's the harm? How does it affect you, Luke Price, in rural North Carolina, for there to be, two men that are recognized by the government as being married? How does it affect you? Well, directly, I guess probably not at all, especially if they are far away from me. Other than if I encounter them, just the what Michael Knowles calls the wisdom of repugnance. But on a deeper level, sin has consequences. When we subvert the way things are naturally supposed to be, there's a cascade of consequences. So, for instance, two men that have claimed for themselves the title of marriage, which is a contradiction in terms, but that they undertake to rear a child. Well, that child is being deprived of his natural mother to be raised by those two men. He will not be given the balance of a mother and a father, the masculine and feminine, in raising him, teaching him to have good head on his shoulders, but also teaching him to have a good heart, giving him the tough love, being strong, but also being a soft landing place. And so that child has been deprived of his natural mother. He has been given a distorted view of the world, and he will not be well adjusted or well positioned as a fully rounded person. All because we recognized that sin as a good thing. So, no, injustice is not only wrong because it is actually or potentially bad for people. It's wrong because it's wrong. Ultimately, the result is that it's bad for people. But who says that something being bad for someone is wrong? The classic argument is, how can you say that it is better to give money to the poor than to kick an orphan in the head? Like, where's the value come from? And you can even get more granular than that. How do you define harm? So there are numerous problems with this worldview. But on the underlying metaphor, and I kind of want to close with this. This notion that morality is a landscape, and there's all these different peaks, and some people will, it's just part of the journey, and sometimes you become more moral, but then science shows you something else, and so you got to get higher up onto this other peak. that still almost makes it seem more subjective, or at least in a way makes it such that science never has to be held to account. Because, oh, well, we're just waiting for science to figure it out. But I don't want to wait. And I don't have to. You don't have to. Because there is a God who is orderly and logical, but also loving. And he made all of this creation for us to subdue it, to be in awe of it, and to ultimately result in his glory. And we messed it up. But God is the source of good. He is not, it's not like good is just a thing that exists and God has that. He's not a person like us. He is good itself. And so Sam Harris poses the question, well, couldn't God have just made killing people good? But this is addressed in classic Christian theology that, well, no, God has his necessary will and he has his free will. And there are things that he cannot do because they are contrary to his nature. So he was not free to make anything good that he wanted to. He could not contradict his nature, which is good. And so we can get at a better understanding of what that is by getting at a better understanding of him. And that comes from this, multi-thousand-year-old book right here. And I'm happy to discuss any concerns that people like Sam Harris have with the legitimacy of Scripture. This has been well defended by people like Wes Huff and others. But on this notion that morality is a landscape, I was thinking about it. Morality is a landscape, but it's not a varied terrain with rolling hills, jagged peaks, and coastal plains. Morality is a landscape consisting of a single plateau, like the city of Jerusalem and Mount Zion, a single height towering over the surrounding abyss. And so there are basically three states that you can be in. You can be down in the abyss. You can be on the highest peak, which we will never attain until the final state of things when Christ returns and everything is made new. Or you can be somewhere in between on the way up. And that's what this show is all about. We are trying to travel upward. We're trying to get closer to God. The closer you get to God, the closer you get to morality. Science is wholly inadequate to equip us for that journey. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments or suggestions. On that note, I wanted to put it out there that I'm not going to spend too much time responding to YouTube comments. The internet doing what it does, I have generated a lot of just silly and stupid and rude comments that aren't even worth my time. But anybody that has a thoughtful comment or something that they want to engage with, I'm happy to discuss over email. And depending on the tenor of it and the topic, I may feature it in a mailbag episode. I'm still thinking of how I want to do that. If I want to just do them thematically or have a whole episode where whatever people write to me about, I feature. So, please send me your emails to Luke Up Podcast. That's Luke, Luke, up podcast at gmail.com. And thank you as always for watching and listening. Have a great day. God bless.